Good evening, and welcome to Philosophized Friday. What follows is a short story, written and read by me, John Norgrove. This work is protected by copyright, so gather yourself and retreat to comforting darkness for the man in the moor. This is a tale of the man of the moor, the frightful ghoul of the bramble sea. For it is said that on autumnal nights such as these, when the moon is hidden by darkened clouds and the light that falls among the underbrush is dim and ghastly, one can see a man wandering the moors. To look directly upon him is to not see him at all, but in the corner vision of one's eye he is there, waiting, almost as though he doesn't want to be seen. From time to time, you can even hear him on a particularly calm night. Though I've heard the sounds he makes are not the words of man, but merely the animalistic utterings of madness. The story goes that he was a soldier of some long-forgotten war, a battle of bramble and heather, let's call it. As swords fell and blood was spilled in this skirmish, the day moved into night, yet the fighting bore on. The men fought and died in their thousands as the evening grew dark, and the moon, but a silvery sliver of hope, rose only to be covered by clouds, almost as though she didn't want to see the carnage coming below. As men fell to sword and axe and hammer, their dying utterances became like spells on the cool night air, their bodies and blood like a sacrifice to the Moors themselves. It was oft said at the time of this battle that the bramble bushes could hold fast a soul as well as it could a body. So the men who fell prayed. They prayed for freedom, that they might travel those low roads home. Most found their way free from those grasping tendrils, but for the grace of the gods are fair and true. One did not. It was said that as the battle turned against the Moor folk, those who knew the ancient ways, one of them chose not to die by the hands of another, but instead to make a sacrifice of his soul. The land was so powered by death on that shadowed night of blood and blade that it answered his plea. Those that lived said he strode to midfield and spoke aloud, that all his brothers could hear him. He spoke thus: "To the Moor I give my soul, my body and my blade, to rise in shadow with vengeful strength, to protect the Moorfolk and this place." Then, with a flash of gleaming metal against the last vestiges of the moonlight, he slit his own throat and spilled his blood aground. As the blood soaked into the soil, and the moon ducked behind the clouds, a whisper picked up on the wind. "My soul is soil, my blood is bramble," so gently whispered across the field of battle that only those silent in the act of dying could hear it. But the whisper rose. Like a coming storm, the wind and words picked up. Soon, those doing the killing could hear it as clear as those who were doing the dying. Like the whisper in the winds, a storm began to grow. In that storm, a fetid flurry of putrid breath began. Like a fog of blood and death, it tickled dread at the nose of those who smelled it and coiled languidly down their spines. The Moorfolk knew what this meant, what the Moor and the whispers were doing, but they fought on, knowing now that they would die in the cool embrace of the soft earth and scratching plants they called home. But with this knowledge, they also knew that the battle was theirs. They knew that every drop of blood spilled that day would make their victory more assured, for the Moor took power from all who fell, regardless of homeland or intent. As the winds picked up, and the storm arrived like crashing waves against a forgotten shore, men began to fall to unseen blades, and die with whispered words on their lips. They first died in twos and threes, bleeding, slumping, and whispering those words: "My soul is soil, my blood is bramble." Before long, those twos and threes became tens and twenties. And every time the enemy turned to face the coming slaughter, they found at their front a wall of wind and whispers, and the Moorfolk were at their backs. There fell that night on the field of battle in the moors of bramble and heather 5,000 men of friend and foe alike, and every drop of life-giving blood spilled in the squall of whisper and hate was drank by the soil. For the battle of bramble and heather was a total loss for both sides. No warrior, nor chieftain, nor animal of war lived to see the morning's light. The story goes that reinforcements for the moorfolk stood atop a distant hillock and watched the evening's proceedings, stuck fast in their place with knowing fear. They'd arrived as the storm touched down, the whispers distant and almost too soft to hear. But the allies of the moorfolk had heard the whispers. They were tribesmen of the grove and glen, more commonly known as treefolk. They had heard and understood, and would have discerned the whispers even if distance had silenced them. For it was said that the treefolk could understand the whispers of leaves and needles, and that they heard the land speak, and understood it. There, upon the hillock, they waited. As the night took men and moorfolk alike, they counted every death. They heard every utterance until the killing had stopped, and the storm had broke, and the moon peeked out of her cover. That's why it takes a hidden moon to see him, the man of the moor. For the blood that taints his earthen soul is only quelled by the moon's beauty. That lustrous silvery light protects us from his vengeance. And even though time has marched on, and the hate and fear of battles past have quieted to the murmurs of old men and forgotten tales we tell to scare our children, he waits, lingering upon the land, to protect it when the time comes again. For his soul is made of soil, and his blood is in the bramble. Thank you for listening to my original short story, written and read by me, John Norgrove. This is part of the short horror collection I'm working on called Tales of Shadowside. Please like this video, comment below, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to know more about my writing, hit me up on social media. I'm at Jive everywhere. Check out our other videos on this channel, and join Wife and I for the Horn and Cauldron podcast every other Monday on most podcasting platforms, or over at nerdjive.com. We've also set up a Patreon if you would like to support more creative works like this, and our other projects. Again, thank you for listening, and I'll be seeing you soon in Shadowside, where the darkness watches and the tales chill.